The date is January 19th, 1997. The Alamodome in San Antonio, Texas, pulses with the electricity of 60,000 voices, creating a wall of sound that seems to make the massive structure itself vibrate. The Royal Rumble, one of the World Wrestling Federation's crown jewel events, is unfolding, and in the ring stands Farouk, known to the world beyond professional wrestling as Ron Simmons. His opponent, the volatile Ahmed Johnson, circles him with barely contained fury. This is Farouk's moment. Just 2 months earlier, he had formed the Nation of Domination, a faction that would reshape the Federation's landscape. He is positioned, everyone believes, for a championship run. After all, this is a man who made history as World Championship Wrestling's first black heavyweight champion. This is a former professional football player and defensive tackle who commanded respect in the most physically demanding sport in America. This is an All-American from Florida State University whose athletic pedigree is beyond question. The match builds to its crescendo, and then it happens. A disqualification. Farouk loses, but retains enough momentum that his followers believe this is merely a setback on an inevitable march to glory. But they are wrong. Terribly, tragically wrong. What follows is not ascension but humiliation. Ron Simmons would capture tag team gold 3 times in the Federation, yes. But these would be brief, forgettable reigns totaling mere months. He would never hold singles championship gold. This man, this historic champion, this legitimate athlete, would become a glorified jobber whose primary function was elevating others. He would win exactly 0 significant singles matches when the stakes truly mattered. And perhaps most insulting of all, he would be reduced to a comedy act, his legacy compressed into a single-word catchphrase shouted for cheap laughs. How could Vince McMahon disrespect a man of Ron Simmons' caliber so profoundly? Ronald Simmons was born on May 15, 1958, in Perry, Georgia. His path to professional wrestling was paved with legitimate athletic achievement, not the manufactured kind that wrestling so often peddles. At Warner Robins High School, he dominated on the football field, his combination of size, speed, and intelligence making him a coveted recruit. Florida State University came calling, and Simmons answered, becoming a consensus All-American and anchoring a defense that made opposing offenses reconsider their career choices. The Cleveland Browns selected him in the draft, and though his time in professional football was relatively brief, it established something crucial. Ron Simmons was the real deal. When injuries curtailed his career, he transitioned to professional wrestling, training and developing his craft before landing in World Championship Wrestling in the late 1980s. Here, Simmons soon found himself as part of a tag team, Doom, alongside Butch Reed. They wore masks and captured tag team gold, but it was when Simmons broke out as a singles competitor that history beckoned. On August 2, 1992, in Baltimore, Maryland, Ron Simmons defeated Vader to become the World Heavyweight Champion. The significance cannot be overstated. In an industry that had been dominated by white champions for generations, in a Southern-based company performing in front of audiences where racial tensions still simmered beneath the surface, Ron Simmons shattered a barrier that many thought would never break. He was not presented as a novelty or a token. He was presented as a legitimate, dominant champion who had defeated one of the most feared monsters in the business. His reign lasted nearly 5 months, and he defended the championship against credible opponents, proving that his victory was no fluke. When he eventually lost the title, Ron Simmons had cemented his place in wrestling history. He was a world champion, a trailblazer, a man who had proven he could carry the top prize in a major promotion. So when Ron Simmons arrived in the World Wrestling Federation in 1996, expectations were sky high. Surely Vince McMahon, always eager to poach his rival's top talent, would recognize what he had acquired. Surely the man who had broken racial barriers and proven he could work main event programs would be positioned for similar success in the Federation. Instead, Vince McMahon dressed him in a ridiculous blue gladiator helmet and called him Farouk Assad. The presentation was immediately problematic, reeking of stereotype and gimmickry that seemed designed to minimize rather than maximize his credibility. He was positioned as a militant leader, and while the Nation of Domination would eventually become a significant faction, its early days were marked by losses and missteps. Farouk challenged The Undertaker for the championship at the King of the Ring in June 1997, and he lost. This was the biggest singles match opportunity of his Federation career, and it resulted in defeat. The message was clear: Ron Simmons was not being groomed as a future world champion. He was being groomed as a gatekeeper at best. Then came the moment that perhaps best encapsulates the disrespect. In late 1997 and early 1998, a young, charismatic wrestler named Rocky Maivia was floundering as a babyface. The crowds rejected his smiling, wholesome persona with vitriol that stunned Federation management. Rocky needed a heel turn, a complete character overhaul, so Vince McMahon inserted him into the Nation of Domination, and in one of the most pivotal moments in professional wrestling history, Rocky Maivia became The Rock and turned on Farouk, taking leadership of the faction. Ron Simmons, a former world champion with legitimate credentials, was used as a stepping stone to launch The Rock's career. The Rock would go on to become one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, eventually transcending the business to become a Hollywood megastar. Yet Ron Simmons was kicked out of his own faction, his leadership stripped away, his credibility sacrificed on the altar of building someone else's legend. This was the pattern that would define his entire Federation career: serving others, elevating others, yet never himself elevated. After being ousted from the Nation of Domination, Simmons floundered for a period before being paired with John Bradshaw Layfield to form the Acolytes Protection Agency. The gimmick was straightforward. They were beer-drinking, cigar-smoking, ass-kicking enforcers for hire. They became tremendously popular, and there is no denying that Ron Simmons found success in this role. They captured the Tag Team Championship 3 times, feuding with teams like the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudley Boys during the tag team renaissance of the early 2000s. But here is where we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Tag team success is a demotion for a former world heavyweight champion. It was an insult, a waste of potential, a deliberate suppression of his capabilities. Consider the other former WCW world champions who made their way to the Federation during and after the Monday Night Wars. Goldberg arrived and promptly won the World Heavyweight Championship. Booker T, despite initial missteps, eventually captured the World Heavyweight Championship and held multiple mid-card titles. Ric Flair was treated like wrestling royalty, allowed to flourish as both a competitor and a personality, and he even won the Intercontinental Championship. Even Hulk Hogan, whose WCW run had ended in ignominy, returned to the Federation and captured the Undisputed Championship in 2002. But Ron Simmons, the man who broke the color barrier, the man whose WCW World Heavyweight Championship reign was historic and significant, never received a serious singles push. Not once. The 3 tag team championships he won, while respectable, total approximately 9 months combined. Vince McMahon gave him scraps and expected him to be grateful. The tag team championships actually make the disrespect more obvious, not less. They prove that McMahon recognized Ron Simmons had value. He saw that crowds responded to him. He knew Simmons could perform at a high level, but he deliberately capped his ceiling. He kept him away from the singles main event scene, where he might have overshadowed other chosen stars. The Acolytes were successful because Ron Simmons and Bradshaw were talented and had chemistry. But it was also a safe place to park Simmons, where he could make money for the company without ever threatening to become the guy. It was placement in his lane, a lane that McMahon had determined was far below what his resume deserved. The indignities continued. While the Acolytes era had its moments of glory, it also featured countless losses where Simmons and Bradshaw existed to make other teams look good. They were utility players, valuable for their reliability, but never the franchise cornerstones. And then came the final humiliation. After the team dissolved, Ron Simmons was reduced to sporadic appearances, where his entire character consisted of appearing randomly, surveying whatever chaos was unfolding, and shouting one word: "Damn." This became his legacy in the company's presentation. Not the first Black World Heavyweight Champion, not the football player who conquered professional wrestling, not the man who helped launch The Rock's career. Just a walking catchphrase, a meme before memes dominated internet culture. The company had taken a legitimate legend and transformed him into a punchline. The company rarely acknowledged Ron Simmons' historic WCW World Heavyweight Championship reign. When they did mention it, it was often in passing, without the reverence afforded to other champions. This was particularly galling given the company's eventual purchase of WCW and its tape library. They owned the footage of Ron Simmons making history, but they chose not to celebrate it, not to build him up as a trailblazer who deserved honor. Instead, they inducted him into the Hall of Fame in 2012, a recognition that came years after his active career had ended. And even that felt perfunctory, an acknowledgement of obligation rather than genuine celebration. The question that haunts Ron Simmons' Federation career is simple. Why? Why would Vince McMahon bring in a former world champion, a man with legitimate athletic credentials and a history-making reign, only to systematically ensure he never reached similar heights in the Federation? Several theories exist, none of them flattering. Perhaps McMahon simply did not value the rival championships the way he valued his own promotion's titles, seeing them as inferior and their holders as inherently less worthy. Perhaps there were racial dynamics at play, conscious or unconscious biases that made McMahon reluctant to position another black wrestler as a dominant singles champion during an era when the company was already navigating complex representations of race through factions like the Nation of Domination. Perhaps it was simple creative short-sightedness, an inability to see past the immediate use of Ron Simmons as a solid hand who could work competently without requiring the attention and booking investment that top stars demanded. Or perhaps it was pettiness, a desire to demonstrate that prior achievements meant nothing once talent entered Vince McMahon's territory, that only success in the Federation truly counted. Whatever the reason, the result is undeniable. Ron Simmons was disrespected. His talent was wasted. His legacy was diminished. He deserved better than to be remembered primarily for a one-word catchphrase and serviceable tag team work. He deserved to be positioned as the legend he was, not as a utility player whose primary function was making others look good. Vince McMahon had a world champion in his roster, a man who had shattered barriers and proven his worth at the highest level, and he chose to squander that potential. That is not just a missed opportunity, that is disrespect, pure and deliberate. Ron Simmons deserved to be celebrated as a pioneer, but instead he was reduced to an afterthought, and wrestling history is poorer for it.